This podcast is sponsored by valleygivesback.org. What will you be remembered for? Name a Valley nonprofit in your estate plan and create a legacy that tells future generations what mattered to you. Making a gift that costs nothing during your lifetime is easy and revocable if things change. With a planned gift, you have the power to impact the Valley forever without affecting your current lifestyle. Your action inspires others to make a difference in their own way. Remember the Valley. Ask your accountant, financial planner, or attorney about planned giving options. Plan now. Give later. Impact tomorrow. Learn more at valleygivesback.org. It's Eugene Driscoll of valleyindy.org. Welcome to Navel Gazing, the Valley Indy podcast. We are sponsored by valleygivesback.org, as you just heard, because I know you all pay attention to the opening ad, right? Right. Visit that website when you get a chance and find out a new way to support Valley nonprofits. All right, so this week I was just writing a story out of last week's Board of Aldermen meeting, which was last Thursday, January, whatever. I'm recording this on the 14th, so whatever Thursday was, you figure it out. I'm not good at math. And they had this great discussion because I've been a reporter now on the local level for 20 years, and I love me a good municipal meeting. And by that, I mean when there's a topic of some weight with some meat to be discussed. That's the issue of the moment of the meeting. And there are differences of opinion about said issue, but it's not just political BS or spinning or trying to make the other guy look bad. There's actually honest to goodness different philosophies about how to apply some type of municipal policy. And that happened last week at the Derby Board of Aldermen meeting. They were talking about whether to grant a tax break, they call it a tax incentive, but it's a tax break, for AIEP. That is the company that purchased the former Marshall Lane Manor Nursing Home, 101 Marshall Lane in East Derby, and converted it into a dormitory/community for international high school students who come to America, primarily from China, from what I understand, to study at the elite private high schools in the area. So the specific deal, if you will, on the table for the aldermen to consider, and alderwomen, was whether to grant a tax break of about $47,000 that would be phased in over the next, or phased out, I guess, more accurately, over the next 3 years. They would pay a little less in year 1, 2, and then 3. Year 4, they're back up to their full tax bill. So in this first clip, I'm going to play David Guerrera. He is the co-founder of the company, went to Fairfield University, actually, with Ethan Fry, our former reporter. He talks about, or he makes the case why he thinks Derby should grant this for his company and why the city should have a policy in place to begin with. There wasn't one before AIEP came to the city. Here's David Guerrera.
My name is David Guerrera, owner of 101 Marshall Lane in Derby, Connecticut. I'm here this evening to request the support of the Derby Board of Aldermen and Alderwomen.
Oh yeah, it's me again. You might have to turn this up. I recorded this on an iPhone, so the sound quality is not perfect. And everyone who complains out there about the sound quality of this podcast, give me a break. I'm one guy. I record this thing. I have no training in broadcast. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm a self-taught audio engineer, I guess, so give me a break and deal with it.
For their approval of our submitted tax incentive application for 101 Marshall Lane. Prior to purchasing 101 Marshall Lane, I met with Mayor Zekin in a very early 2018 to formally introduce myself after a long but fruitful 8 months of public meetings with the Derby Planning and Zoning Commission on our proposed zone tax change. I expressed my gratitude for his support of our project and explained and committed to our future plans for 101 Marshall Lane. The issue of Derby not having a tax incentive plan similar to other Connecticut towns and cities was discussed during our meeting. I expressed my concern for the long road ahead if I were to purchase 101 Marshall Lane, including but not limited to the extraordinary investment for the future benefit of the continued operation of a dilapidated, empty old building whose tax revenue performance was for many years below normal. Other Connecticut developers whom I'm familiar with questioned why I thought Derby was a financially practical location for our dormitory project when other towns had tax rates that were much lower or at the very least welcome new businesses with a generous tax incentive plan. The mayor and I discussed the proposed tax incentive plan and suggested that I work with his economic development liaison, Mr. Carmen DeCenzo, to help offer my business advice on how a plan might be created. Monthly, I followed up with Mr. DeCenzo to see what the status of the tax incentive plan was, as I expected the plan to be passed prior to me commencing renovations. And the response was a cordial, we are diligently working on it. With the anticipation of the City of Derby implementing a tax incentive plan and my immediate need to purchase 101 Marshall Lane to complete renovations prior to the upcoming school year, I took a risk and moved forward with the purchase of the building instead of waiting for the plan's formal approval.
It's Eugene. Sorry to interrupt again, but I should probably point out that the timing, he's talking about the timing here because one of the things that Alderwoman Barbara DeGennaro pointed out last month is that the city, the alderman, is talking about retroactively, essentially, granting this tax incentive because the work, or at least the work, $1.5 million worth of work has already been done. And the last line of the ordinance that they adopted says this can't be retroactive. So that's why the timing is important here.
Today, I have personally invested my own hard-earned capital into 101 Marshall Lane over a very short period of 4 months in which renovations were completed. To this day, visitors are amazed that the project was completed so quickly. We made a promise to the city and taxpayers of Derby and delivered on it 110%. We currently house bright, dedicated, hardworking, happy international students attending nearby high schools, and to date have had no complaints. If anything, numerous compliments from neighbors and school officials on what we have accomplished have been forthcoming. I am planning on renovating the back half of 101 Marshall Lane very soon. However, I am anxiously waiting for the approval of our tax incentive application so that I can continue running and investing in 101 Marshall Lane. Please kindly consider my application, as we are indeed a new business to Derby, have invested significant capital in Derby, and will continue to do so for many years to come. Thank you.
Okay, again, that was David Guerrera of AIEP talking about requesting that the Board of Aldermen grant his new business a 3-year tax break of $47,000 total. Things that jumped out to me with that was the fact that he had talked to sort of the mayor's administration before purchasing this and decided to go ahead with the expectation that this tax incentive program would be coming. I've heard that before. I went to one of the early tax incentive subcommittee meetings, and developers were basically saying, look, what you're doing here is trying to grow your grand list, and if you give a temporary break over a couple of years just in an adaptive reuse, that's what this is, an adaptive reuse, where you're taking an old property and doing something different with it, you're giving us the ability to do a better project, which benefits everybody. We can plant our seeds, get more involved in the community, do more stuff, and increase our chances of succeeding in a place where it's not easy to do so. Derby is the 5th most economically distressed city in the state of Connecticut, and it's got a high grand list. So I should probably also point out, I'm not advocating who's right and who's wrong in all this. I'm just simply trying to translate these audio recordings so they're not, I'm literally taking them out of context and splitting them up, so I'm providing context. Anyway, up next is Carmen DeCenzo. He is the city's part-time economic development liaison. He's a former alderman. He's a former Board of Aldermen president. He's a former mayoral candidate, former football coach, lived in Derby his whole life, and he chaired the tax incentive committee, and he talks about why the city needs this. Here's Carmen DeCenzo. I'll interrupt to provide context.
Carmen DeCenzo, 730 Drive. I was the chairman of the tax incentive committee, and when we did have our meetings, they were open to the public. Not one person came to the meeting to object to the tax incentive program. The part of the program that Mr. Guerrera's AIEP 101 Marshall Lane, the part of the tax incentive program that he's done is the adaptive reuse. He took a dilapidated building in Ward 3, and I don't believe that a tax incentive program should be specified for certain areas of town. If Derby's gonna offer a tax incentive program, then they should offer it for the entire town.
Interrupting here, it's Eugene again. So what Carmen is talking about there when he says the tax incentive should be applied equally everywhere, anybody from any part of Derby should be able to step forward and make an appeal, assuming they qualify for the program. Right before Carmen spoke, Aniello Malerba, the chairman of the town Democratic Party, spoke. He was on the other side of the room from where I was sitting, so my iPhone just didn't capture the audio in a state that would be reproduced here. You would not be able to hear it. But anyway, basically what Mr. Malerba said was, it sounds like a good plan in general, but we should really be granting these benefits to owners or potential investors, property owners that are in a part of Derby that really needs it, sort of like downtown, where businesses are struggling and come and go, or the downtown redevelopment zone that has been stagnant for years. Although the state recently, by the way, pulled permits to start demo work, which could, on the south side of Main Street, which could start later this month. Another Democrat that had expressed reservations was Mark Garofalo. Last month, the town clerk, just as a private citizen, wrote a letter to the Board of Aldermen saying, the 101 Marshall Lane project was approved with a zone change, and there doesn't seem to be any need to incentivize this project because it clearly works on its own merit. So a difference of philosophy, if you will. That's what Carmen's referring to there. All right, back to Carmen.
He took a dilapidated building and put $1.5 million of his money into the building. He took a building that was bringing in $21,000 a year in taxes, and it's now bringing in $79,947 a year in taxes. Anyone who comes to Derby and qualifies under the adaptive reuse or the other incentive programs that the board passed, and when we did have our meetings, we specifically, Mr. Sampson was there, we specifically said that AIEP would be our first adaptive reuse program.
The Sampson he's referring to is Charles Sampson, the president of the Board of Aldermen.
He is still working on his building. He plans to put another $500,000 into the building, which will bring him up to over $2 million, and he's going to be taxed on that. You are giving him a $15,000 a year break for the next 3 years. But he put $2 million into our city. And he's going to be paying tax on that $2 million for God knows how long. I hope it's forever. And I welcome people to come to Derby to give them a tax incentive program, because that's what we're here for. That's my job. My job is to entice people to come to Derby to build buildings, to adaptive reuse, and that's what we should be doing, attracting new businesses. Thank you.
All right, again, that was Carmen DeCenzo. The other thing I don't know if I mentioned, Alderwoman Barbara DeGennaro brought this up at the December Board of Aldermen meeting when this tax incentive first came up, or the specific application from AIEP to benefit $47,000 over the course of 3 years in this tax incentive program. And she pointed out, hey, the last line of this ordinance we adopted previously says this can't be retroactive, and this is retroactive. So this next clip is Charles Sampson, the president of the Board of Aldermen, asking questions to Carmen DeCenzo, specifically on this retroactive question that Barbara DeGennaro, who's an attorney, by the way, brought up previously. Then Alderman Ron Sill of the 2nd Ward asks a couple of questions, and then Barbara DeGennaro gets in there and makes her points known. Here we go.
It was brought up on the floor about retroactive, being that the application came in, but the construction had already started. But my question is, and I'm going to ask Carmen first. Carmen, as far as you know, construction is still going on from the
Yes.
initial construction.
Yes, he actually has about another $500,000 to put into the back half of his building to finish the rooms.
Okay. And the 47,000 broken up, the 30, 20, 10.
Correct.
So it's approximately 15,000 a year.
Well, it averages out to about 15.5 a year, yes.
And with the current money that he's put in, the 1.5 million plus the additional 500,000, the assessor's already stated that the assessment value on the property, his taxes will be, you said it earlier, was 69 or
79.
79,000.
That's at this
So-
stage right now.
As it stays right now.
Correct.
So this town is still making a
Yes,
64,000.
It's gonna make even,
Technically,
it's gonna make
every
even
year.
more when he's done with the building.
And then after the third year, it goes back to that normal
Yes,
rate.
correct.
Thank you.
A quick word from our sponsor, valleygivesback.org. Adding a Valley charity to your estate plan creates a lasting legacy that tells future generations what causes matter to you. Your action will inspire others to follow your lead and make a difference. With a planned gift, you have the power to impact the Valley community forever without affecting your current lifestyle. Learn more at valleygivesback.org, an initiative of the Valley Community Foundation. Plan now, give later, and impact tomorrow at valleygivesback.org. All right, so yeah, there is Carmen DeCenzo and Charlie Sampson having a little question and answer session. Now it'll be Ron Sill and then Barbara DeGennaro.
If I can ask Carmen, do you know what the taxes, Carmen?
I'm
What
sorry.
the taxes were before on the bill?
21,000.
It was 21,000.
Right, and now it's 79,000 at the 1.5 where he is now, and then it'll go up a little bit more once he finishes the building.
So 2 points, or actually I made a couple points similar last month. One was that the application came in after the ordinance for work done prior to the ordinance taking effect. And my concern, as I said last month, was, what's to stop other businesses or home structures to come in and say they've done work, they now want a tax abatement. And one of my other concerns was the retroactivity of the ordinance. Right in the ordinance says it's not retroactive. And it didn't take effect until October. So that's one of my questions. Now that I looked at the adaptive reuse, I think the paragraph talks about the structure has historical or architectural merit. And I don't know that that's a historical building or has architectural merit, that paragraph applies to 101 Marshall Lane. But the way I read the ordinance in its entirety, that anytime it talked about giving a tax incentive, it was that a new, and it's right in there, a new investment would not happen in Derby without tax incentive requested. And that the level of taxation threatens the continued existence of a structure. And it talks about cost of improvement to be constructed. So again, are we talking about, the ordinance took effect in October. The way I read it was anything forward. Somebody comes, their next, and I think these are questions the way our legal interpretation. That's how I'm interpreting them.
If I may, when we started the program back in, Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was back in March of last year, the tax incentive program. We thought that it would only last like a month or two to get the meetings in, but because of, we took a cross section of Orange, Oxford, Seymour, and we sort of brought that together, and then Corp Council had to take that verbiage, and so it lasted longer, and of course, Mr. Guerrero wanted to open by school time, September, and this, it just took too long, and he had to start his work. So that's why it looks like it's previous of the approval. And not only that, but I would just like to also thank Mr. Guerrero that, there's two blighted houses across the street, which he has bought, and he's going to fix, so when the parents of the children come to visit their children, they're going to be able to stay in those houses. So, he's not only putting money into our land, but he's also helping the area.
But I also, and I don't want, I'm not here to get into interchange any further with the gentleman that was here and spoke, but he also said he had been to Derby for a period of months before planning and zoning, to look at the building. So, be that as it may, the tax incentive program didn't exist 2 years ago or however long when he first came here. So I think I need the clarification is, it says the ordinance is not retroactive. So what does that mean? And I don't know that this building fits the adaptive use now, if that's what Mr. DeCenzo is saying. That's where because it doesn't fit the other criteria. So, I don't know how it fits
so at
this.
this point, Vin Marino, the city attorney, will chime in. Because basically, last month at the Board of Aldermen meeting, these issues were raised, as Alderwoman DeGennaro noted, and the city voted to hold off on granting AIP this tax break until Vin Marino came back with a legal opinion. Because you heard all the issues that Alderwoman DeGennaro was raising. This is retroactive. Our ordinance says it can't be retroactive. We're applying this as an adaptive reuse, and it doesn't jive with this application. This property specifically doesn't jive or meet the definition that's in the ordinance we passed. And also, sort of a third issue is, if we grant this retroactively, can't Wendy's and McDonald's and any commercial non-residential property that's done a big renovation in the last couple of years come back and say, hey, you give them a tax break, you have to give me a tax break. Now, Vin Marino, I'm not including his entire answer. It went on for a little bit. But basically he said, you have the power to grant or not grant to anybody you want. It doesn't matter if you give it to one and not the other. And a lot of this is open to your interpretation. And you're the Board of Aldermen, and interpret it in a way that you see fit. So closing it out is Vin Marino, the city attorney for Derby. And I guess after that, I'll just play the outgoing music, and I will talk to you guys again later this week. Thanks a lot for listening.
So if I may, the councilwoman brings up a number of points, I think, that are obviously all related to the ordinance, but unrelated to the issue. And that the retroactivity, I'd simply say, just to kind of point out, what does that mean? That means, for example, Wendy's, McDonald's, they recently did upgrades within the last couple of years. They could not, under this ordinance, come and get a benefit of your tax incentive ordinance, because that would be a true retroactivity application of the ordinance. The construction was approved, performed, and completed well prior to the adoption of this ordinance. So you could not retroactively give the benefit of a tax incentive to those types of developments. The section right above that, section G, provides some discretion to the Board of Aldermen, meaning that if someone were to come forward with a project across the street, even in an area where we believe would best benefit from tax incentive, you are under no obligation to enter into a tax incentive agreement with anyone. You have the unfettered discretion. That means you can do what you want, meaning you do not have to enter into any agreements at any time, notwithstanding that this ordinance is in place. So I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that just because this ordinance is on your books, it does not obligate you to do anything, okay? Bless you. With respect to the issue that we're talking about, it's a bit of a kind of a nuanced moment, in that this project seems to be straddling two different points in time. Unlike the McDonald's and the Wendy's that had been approved, completed, and the construction finalized prior to this, this developer started a process, and during the time of that process started construction, and then this came into being, with the construction not being wholly completed by the time that this ordinance was put into place. And it's my understanding there's ongoing construction that is going to be forthcoming. Whether or not that construction would qualify, I can't speak to at the moment, because that's something that's up to your assessor to determine through that analysis. So what we have, I would say, because you're kind of in this nuance moment with this project, where you have a project that kind of straddles the adoption of the ordinance, I think it brings us to really the third point, and that is, let's assume for the sake of the hypothetical that you're willing to enter into an agreement, so we don't have to worry about that. Let's assume we've gotten beyond the retroactivity aspect of it. Now the question is, does it fit under the terms of the ordinance? Because, we can sit around academically and debate the retroactivity of it, or the discretion aspect of it, but if the square peg doesn't fit into the round hole, then we're wasting our time talking about the other 2 points. So the only section that this would apply would be the adaptive reuse aspect of the ordinance. And I believe and again, this is your ordinance, so it's subject to your interpretation, but it's my recollection from the subcommittee and I think it might have just been loose draftsmanship at the time, and then again, you can interpret your ordinance the way you see appropriate, but where there are buildings in town that have historic value or might not otherwise be utilized in their present form. So it's kind of a preservation provision. Can we avoid this structure from being demolished and repurposed for some other use than what it was originally intended? You can interpret that section to be in that way, or you can interpret it the way other communities do, and it's more in the historical nature. For example, the buildings across the street that are going to be torn down. They should never have been torn down because of the historical nature of those buildings, and we want to keep them and we want to preserve them, and we do that through the adaptive reuse process. This is a moment less of kind of legal persuasion and more of your own interpretation of what you intend through the adaptive reuse provision. Because if you want to maintain and reutilize buildings that you have throughout your community, then you can employ.
So in the end,
this
and I think this is me.
provision, assuming
That's me
that
closing my notebook,
your
I think.
assessor and your committee
But at the end of the
has-
day, after much discussion, at the end of the day, at the end of the meeting there, at the end of the discussion, I mean, they voted 7-2 to approve the tax break for AIEP. Alderwoman DeGennaro and D'Onofrio voted against it. So, thanks a lot again for listening. Talk to you again.